Parents, there is a big difference between a tantrum and a meltdown, and understanding that difference is important. It's not just semantics because you would want to handle each of those situations very differently. Parents, you've probably been in a situation like this. Maybe you're out shopping, you're at the grocery store, then it's seemingly out of nowhere. Your young child, or maybe even a little bit of an older child, they're on the floor, they're screaming, they're having some sort of explosion, and you are stuck. You're embarrassed, and you don't really know if you're going to be able to fight it out and try to recalibrate, get back on track, finish the mission, finish the trip, or if you've got to abandon the cart, leave it in the store, and just drag them out to the car and live to fight another day. That is tough. And it really is a hard choice to differentiate between when do we need to, realize that they're probably just fighting for their own way or trying to get something they want, or when do we need to acknowledge that this is a dysregulated kid having a breakdown and they need grace, they need support. That's what this video is for. I want to show you some of the differences. I want to give you some tools that you can use to make life easier, both in figuring out when that situation is one or the other, and what can you do to have a more chill, regulated childhood. Please don't let me tell you or let anybody else tell you parenting can be easy. That's not what we're working for. I would use that on my own kids if that were possible, but what is absolutely possible is easier, right? Sometimes as a parent, you feel like you are fighting an impossible uphill battle. You're walking on eggshells all the time, and there's nothing you can do to help your child regulate or make the good decisions that you're hoping and wanting them to make. That's what this is about, is when do we have a kid who needs more support and needs to be come alongside rather than maybe disciplined or approached with a more behavioral intervention strategy. So what are the differences? Fundamentally, the way we're differentiating between a tantrum and a meltdown would be a tantrum. Let's think of broad categories. Let's just think of it as a behavioral issue, right? That's what a tantrum would be, or more of a neurological challenge. That's what a meltdown would be. The tantrum is a kid who is going after a tactical advantage, right? They want to get their own way. Maybe they want a toy. They want a special treat at the store. They don't want to go to bed. There's something that they are trying to accomplish. It does tend to be a little bit more short-lived, right? They're going to go and then come out of it. Versus a meltdown, that is a neurological experience that child is having. Think of that as like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but your computer, your laptop, your phone, there's just too many tabs open, there's too many programs running, and it crashes. It shuts down. That's kind of what their nervous system is doing. They reach this sensory overload place. They get totally tapped out, totally overwhelmed, and they can't calm down. They can't calm back down. It's a neurological challenge at its root. And since the nervous system is the air traffic control of every other function and system in your body, they can't do anything, right? Their thinking brain, their conscious, rational, able to process and reason part of their nervous system is shut down, and they are completely in fight or flight. So there's a big difference here, right? A tantrum versus a meltdown, you would want to approach differently. How does this happen though? How do we get to this point? Let's back up and understand a little bit more of when you might have a kid heading towards a meltdown, so you know how to differentiate, and then you also can understand the blueprint of getting them out of that. We see a lot of different triggers that can end up with a kid in this overwhelmed neurological state. More or less what that would be referred to as sympathetic overdrive. The sympathetic nervous system is your body's fight or flight response. It's your survival mechanism. It's what pumps in and kicks into gear when you're in some sort of survival mode situation, which is totally fine if you are running from a bear. Not so good if you're in the grocery store or just going through normal everyday life in your house. What gets that turned on, though, is a variety of different circumstances. We refer to it as the perfect storm because there's a path, there's a journey that way too many kids that we see are going on. A lot of times it started as some sort of maternal stress, right? During pregnancy, mom or baby is under some sort of extra demands, extra stress in their own lives, which means their system is in fight or flight. That can oftentimes be complicated by then birth interventions. More interventions at birth, specifically vacuum, forceps, C-section delivery, or any sort of prolonged labor or too early, any sort of extra pulling at that sensitive head and neck has a massive impact on the newborn because this upper neck area is where the calming part of their neurology lives, right? The vagus nerve specifically is the brake pedal. It is the calming part of the rest and digestion regulation side of neurology. And it basically is the counterbalance to the stress response. That sympathetic gas pedal overdrive mode, we have no brakes. That gets basically uninhibited control, and you have a kid that's in fight or flight or teetering on the brink of fight or flight at all times. So we see those different factors, and then that can only be even more complicated by maybe early life toxic exposures, needing antibiotics near the start of life. It's just going to compound those early factors and lead to this downward spiral that shows up as many different things, whether it's a colicky, refluxy, constipated baby, ear infections, immune struggles, onwards. It's all a part of the same journey. That's probably a message for another video that would take more time to dig into, but it's all connected, and we got to get to the cause to get off of that path. So that's how we get to this place. And if you have this dysregulated nervous system, it's like you're trying to build a house on a faulty foundation, right? That is the foundation of gut and immune function, of motor system, of behavioral choices and regulation. And so when that first step is off, everything else is going to fall off. What happens then is if you try to discipline a child in a meltdown, it's probably going to make things worse because they are in this dysregulated state that only feels like an extra attack, right? It feels like even more insult to injury, and you can't do that and expect it to be a positive outcome. Honestly, even giving into whatever the trigger was, a lot of times doesn't help at this point, right? Maybe they wanted to get some sort of toy, wanted to get some sort of treat, and you eventually just cave. You're like, fine, you can have it, whatever, just stop screaming. Even in that scenario, a lot of times they can't calm back down when we've hit meltdown state because their system is just tapped out, right? They've reached overdrive, and you can't really do anything other than be there, support, co-regulate for them. So when we're using parenting strategies, behavioral intervention strategies, which would live over here in that tantrum world for a meltdown, you're probably going to make things worse. How can you know if you're going to skew more one towards the other? Well, one, you can look for some of those warning signs, right? If your kid's case history has early life stressors, if it has maybe birth intervention, or if it has some of those colic, reflux, constipation, plagiocephaly, like flat head, needing a helmet, ear infections, immune system struggles, allergies and eczema. If we've had those struggles early on in life, it tells us we've got a dysregulated nervous system, right? We have some sort of problem controlling and coordinating all of those health functions in your body, and they maybe are going to be more triggered from a sensory perspective, right? Because that sensory overload is at the root of this. So we can see those contributing factors in a kid and know that they're probably going to have a harder time regulating emotions as well. It can be deceptive because especially as we get older, it looks different in every kid, right? For some kids, just because they're different, and then for some, when they get to a certain age, instead of that explosion and tantrum, like screaming on the floor, it looks more like a shutdown, right? They go into sometimes a dark place, and they hide from interaction, and they don't interact, and it's almost like you go over the crest of that hill of high energy and then just shut down. That is an even more deeper, concerning neurological pathway. But if you're seeing that take place in your kid's journey, it's a red flag that they probably have this sensory overdrive, not just a behavioral issue that they're dealing with. Another indicator would be those meltdowns just come out of nowhere, right? It seems like it's not triggered by anything. It seems like everything was fine before that, and it takes so little to set them off. A lot of times parents will use the phrase that they go from 0 to 100 in an instant, and that's what it feels like. But I think a more accurate, at least from a neurological framework, a more accurate way to put it would be they're going from 95 to 100 or 99 to 100 in an instant. It's that their default mode is that their internal baseline or operating system is already so heightened that it doesn't take a whole lot of extra stimulation to push them over the edge. So hopefully what you're taking away from this, parents, is that there is a difference here and we need to handle them differently. What can we do to actually address the cause? That's what we're obsessed with here at Thrive, is what is the cause and how do we get to the bottom of that? Well, it's getting to the bottom of that sympathetic overdrive, right? It's measuring how is their nervous system handling sensory input. How are we operating from that fight or flight perspective? So that's where we dig into the case history. We get into all the X's and O's of how we got to this point, but then we put together a game plan of saying, this is what we're going to do to get out of it. The scans are at the root of that. The scans, the neurological assessment that we do, lets us objectively measure and track how is the nervous system functioning. Are we at a baseline state? Are we in more of a cruise control operating mode? Or are we dealing with some of these extra struggles, extra challenges from a neuro perspective that we then need to put together a plan to undo and unwind? So scans dictate the plans. Scans plus the story, the case history, leads us to care plan, which gets us the unlock to those kids reaching their full potential. If you want to know, if you're wondering, is this my child? Is that sensory overload what is triggering their system so much? Please reach out. Send us a message, comment on this video, give the office a call. We're here to walk you through the process. We'll set up those scans for your kid. We'll set up that phone consult to dig into their history, and we'll see what we can do to help them thrive. Hope this helps, parents. Thank you for listening. You get a little bonus dad joke here, by the way. This is our whiteboard topic this week. If you know the answer, you can comment here. Or you can, if you don't want to give it away for everybody else, send us a message. We'll believe you. Don't Google it. That's cheating. What do you call a paper airplane that won't fly? Let me know what you think. Have an awesome one, guys. See you soon.